Hello and welcome. My name is Claire Dool and I'm your moderator. Platform work, does it help or hinder gender equality? That's the issue we are going to be addressing today with our panel of experts. Let me briefly introduce them. Carola Bouton is a Senior Policy Officer at the European Commission's DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Carola is responsible for policy development on the future of work within the Commission's Employment Strategy Unit. And we are going to be hearing from her later when she's going to talk more about some Commission proposals on platform work. Irene Mandel is Head of Unit Employment at Eurofound, a EU agency. She has been researching platform work for more than 8 years and with a particular focus on employment and working conditions. Her most recent research explores future scenarios of platform work by 2030. Jill Rubery is an international expert on platform work and gender equality. For 14 years, she coordinated the European Commission's expert group on gender, social inclusion and employment that provides research and policy advice for the Equal Opportunities Unit. She is also a co-investigator for a new digitalisation of work research centre in the UK, which was set up this year. Jill is currently a professor at the University of Manchester. And Uma Rani, who is a senior economist at the research department of the International Labour Organization. In 2018, Uma authored a report which is called Digital Label Platforms and the Future of Work. And she's currently researching a major ILO flagship report that's called Digital Transformation of the World of Work, the Growing Role of Digital Labour Platforms. And that report looks at gender issues and is going to be out in February. So during our discussion, please do tweet using the hashtag IGAindex2020. And we would love also to get your questions. So if you're a registered participant, you can use the Q&A button on the screen. Also, if you're using the WorksApp platform, please use the Q&A icon. We would really like to hear your questions. And when you submit them, it would be really useful if you could say who you would like to answer. But let's start with a scene setter from Jakob Keisel, who is a statistic officer at IGA and who's going to give his thoughts on whether platform work hinders or helps gender equality.
Thank you, Claire. And I'm indeed going to talk today about whether platform work hinders or supports gender equality. And you will notice that this is a narrower focus than the thematic focus part of the index, which deals with broader advances in digitalization and their consequences for the labor market and for gender equality in the labor market and beyond. So for this, I would encourage you to have a look at the index if you're interested in these broader aspects. Here we are going to talk specifically about one aspect of digitalization, which is work organized via online platforms such as Uber, Deliveroo, or Amazon Mechanical Turk. And specifically, we are going to ask the following 3 questions. So we are going to look at whether platform work can challenge unequal participation in paid and unpaid work. We are going to ask whether platform work discrimination at work, and we are going to look at eligibility of platform workers for work and social protections that are crucial for gender equality. Now, before we do that, a brief introduction on the platform work itself. So in our report, we understand platform work as per Eurofund's definition as a form of employment that uses an online platform to enable organizations or individuals to access other organizations or individuals to solve problems or to provide services in exchange for payment. Now, platform work covers a broad range of services, which can be divided into 2 broad types: services provided purely online, such as small online translation tasks, delivered via Amazon Mechanical Turk, and also on-site services such as taking a ride with Uber or ordering a domestic service via Handy. Now, platform work at the moment is a small-scale phenomena in the EU. It has been around 10% of EU adult population has ever tried platform work, and for around 2%, this is the main source of employment. It is the main source of employment. And it is maybe important to mention here right at the start that platform work is often combined with other activities and takes place for a couple of hours per week in most cases. Looking forward at how platform work is going to grow or not, this is rather uncertain at the moment in light of the current pandemic. So the pandemic has hit especially some services within platform work hard, such as ride-hailing or provision of domestic services, while other services may have not been affected all that much, such as food delivery, where demand might have even increased. However, looking at an overall picture, it seems that the impact was overall negative in the beginning, and some of this lingers. Now, let's move on to our key 3 questions that we want to address today. So first, we are going to look at whether platform work, challenges unequal participation in paid and unpaid work. And to do so, first, I want to mention that women are underrepresented among platform workers. They account for about a third of them at the moment, and that the broad range of services delivered, performed via platforms follows a well-known pattern of gender segregation. So for example, certain types of high-skilled, well-paid jobs, such as software development, is dominated by men. Another important aspect to look at when considering work participation is how can platform work be combined with unpaid work, such as caring responsibilities. And for that, it's important to look at work flexibility in platform work. Now, it is indeed often argued that platform work provides empowering entrepreneurship where workers can control their schedules and place of work. And this provides unique opportunities for women to combine paid work with unpaid caring responsibilities or other unpaid work that they would not find elsewhere. And we do find that this applies to some services performed via platforms. So for example, looking at certain online services surveyed by the ILO, we find that around a third of women engaged in care when they began to work via such online platforms, and that around 15% of women who work via these platforms need to work from home due to care responsibilities. Now, these proportions are much higher than for men, so it indeed does seem that there is something particularly that there is something that women in particular can enjoy here in terms of combination of paid and unpaid work. However, this argument should not be taken at a general level because there are many platform services where this would not apply, because in certain type of services, such as personal transport or certain types of small online tasks, also called click work, performed via platforms, it is common that platforms adopt practices that limit worker autonomy and disempower them, which then makes it obviously more difficult for people to combine platform work with unpaid work. And this might help us explain why we actually see women underrepresented at the moment in platform work. I will illustrate this on a short example of the already mentioned click work. Here, platforms usually collect a small tasks from clients, post them online, and set deadlines on them, also set by the clients. Now, this generates particular working patterns for workers who have to spend a lot of unpaid time searching for work. They have to accept work immediately once it becomes available, and they often have to complete it under tight deadlines. Now, from what I'm saying, it should be clear that this type of working patterns do not combine well with such unpredictable activities such as childcare. And indeed, we see important consequences for gender equality here, as, for example, women cannot reach certain best paid tasks, and therefore this contributes to pay gap. Second issue of concern that I want to mention here is that work flexibility is used differently by women and men working on platforms. So staying with the example of online platform work, we see that women often combine this work with unpaid care, whereas men often combine this work with other employment to top up their income. Similarly, when we look at parents, we see much more intense work among fathers than among mothers. Now, this suggests that rather than challenging inequalities in unpaid work, platform work may actually be reinforcing them. It may lead for women to taking up odd jobs in between their caring responsibilities, and for men to work long hours and not having their time for their family at all. Here, it is important to insist that platform work should not be considered as a substitute for proper support for carers, such as childcare provision or well-designed parental leave schemes. Moving on to the next question that we want to address today, we will now look at whether platform work defies or reinforces discrimination at work. Here, I want to talk about a couple of opportunities often mentioned. This first opportunity that is often mentioned is that interaction between platform workers and clients are sometimes anonymous, and this obviously reduces the scope for discrimination. However, this is not all that common practice, as many workers are supported or even obliged to publish personal information about themselves, such as gender, age, picture, or name. In some cases, by posting more information about oneself, one might actually be able to get to better jobs. Second opportunity that is often mentioned here are customer rating systems, often used by platforms, such as when you get out of a taxi and you have the opportunity to rate your ride on your screen. Now, these rating systems are often perceived as some kind of objective evaluation of worker performance that provides useful information to customers. However, there are typically no mechanisms built in these rating systems that would prevent a submission of biased rating. So these customer rating systems might actually easily become vehicles of biases among the customer base of a given app. And concerningly, we have seen such gender and other biases creep in similar settings, such as in online hiring decisions or in online worker performance evaluation. Now, I also want to mention some challenges related to applying EU gender equality and non-discrimination legislation linked to platform work, which result from the fact that platform work is extremely fragmented, where workers often work at the same time for multiple platforms, multiple clients, and they do so on an irregular basis. Now, firstly, this obviously makes identification of a comparable worker in discrimination claims very difficult, which then makes it difficult to prove that there is discrimination. Secondly, the sources of discrimination may be rather opaque and impersonal. They might reside in the customer rating systems, for example, or in the ways apps match workers and customers. And it may not be even apparent to the workers that they are being discriminated against by these systems, and definitely not by whom. In light of what I'm saying, it's perhaps not surprising that we observe some well-known forms of discrimination in platform work as well. For example, gender pay gap has now been documented in a wide range of, in a number of studies across different types of platforms, and it ranges from 4 to 20% in such studies. It is due to some well-known factors, such as gender segregation or inequalities in unpaid work. It is also affected by some specifics of platform work that we have already discussed, such as anonymity of interaction or customer rating systems. What I want to highlight here is that the pay gap in platform work really depends on the type of service provided. And I will illustrate this on a short example of Uber drivers in the US, where a large-scale, robust study has found a 7% pay gap among drivers. And this could be explained entirely by 3 factors. So firstly, it was because men had more experience than women driving for Uber, because they tended to drive longer on this platform. And they also accumulate experience faster because they work more intensively. Secondly, it was due to differences in driving location among men and women, where men and women live in different places and also drive close to these places. But also because women are less prone to drive in more dangerous areas where they might need to pick up intoxicated customers, for example. Finally, men tend to drive faster than women on Uber. Now, moving on to the final question of today, which we want to address, it is the eligibility of platform workers for work and social protections crucial for gender equality. Here, I will start in a little bit of a broader way, because it's important to note that many platform workers are not eligible for standard labor and social protections. And this is because of 2 factors. So firstly, it is because platform workers are usually considered as self-employed or independent contractors, and this reduces their eligibility. Secondly, it is because of the fragmented nature of the work, where it's often difficult to demonstrate continuous nature of employment, and again, this reduces eligibility of platform workers for these protections. Now, this obviously means that platform workers are also not eligible for certain protections that are crucial from a gender equality perspective, such as childcare and childbirth-related protections, where we see, based on a recent study by the EU Commission, that, for example, around a half of self-employed women aged 15 to 49 have no access to maternity leave at the moment. And recent research by EGE has also shown that self-employed face important gaps in eligibility to parental leaves. Final point that I want to highlight here, which came into the spotlight in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, is that absence of certain types of benefits, such as sickness or unemployment benefits, have left platform workers often in existential situations where they had to decide between losing a vital source of income with no support available, or exposing themselves and others to significant health risks. And while this is not investigated from gender perspective yet, it will be important to look at it in the future. Now, I know that the time for the presentation is drawing towards the end, so allow me just to briefly conclude. From the presentation that I gave today, it should be clear that platform work often seems to reproduce rather than challenge existing inequalities, but that there is some potential for platform work to promote gender equality if it is well regulated. And for it to be well regulated, we need more research from a gender perspective to underpin gender-sensitive regulations. And this is what we are doing currently at EGE, where we are carrying out a study on platform work specifically, and we hope to come up with more tangible policy recommendations in the process. Thank you, and back to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Jakob. And let's start with that first remark, that platform work often seems to reinforce existing gender inequalities, particularly in the areas of gender pay gap and gender segregation, concerns that are also borne out in this year's IGA Gender Equality Index. Let me start with our researchers here. Jill, do you share the concerns that have been raised by Jakob here, that platform work could, and perhaps is, reinforcing traditional gender inequalities?
I certainly do. I think platform work, in some sense, is a further extension of some of the problems we've seen over recent years of employers reducing their responsibilities to providing good employment conditions. We see it in outsourcing, for example, but now we have platform work. The employers become effectively hidden. And the problem for women is not so much that they're necessarily going to have the highest engagement in this kind of work. It might be young people, for example, but women are more at risk of being trapped in this kind of work if they start doing it because of a lack of opportunities when they have major caring responsibilities, and then find it difficult to transfer back into the normal labour market. So what I'm worried about is that women will be those who are long-term dependent on this kind of work, not topping it up from a major their main job, but actually the only kind of work. And they're then going to suffer this problem of unpaid time when they're searching for work and lack of access to social protection. And also possibly not being able, as key points, to actually take the higher paid jobs because of their care responsibilities.
Thank you, Jill, indeed, for expressing those concerns that women may be trapped in this type of work, where you have said that employers are sometimes hidden and don't offer social protections. Thank you. Irene, can I ask you to pick up on what Jill has said and also what Jakob has said, and where are your worries? Where are your concerns?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here for this interesting discussion. I also support to agree to what Jakob presented here. So from an overall research perspective, literally all surveys, all data that are available points to the fact that platform work is very much male-dominated. So the typical profile for the platform worker is the young male, highly educated one. So that already gives some indication of that it is not as accessible for all groups of workers as is often promoted as an easy labor market access tool. And we also see that particularly those platform workers who do it as a main job to earn the majority of their income through platform work, that is very strongly male dominated. So here the share of women is very low. And there is some bit more better gender balanced in some types of platform work. So like, for example, online micro tasks, which on the other hand, again, have then the disadvantage of being of lower quality as regards working and employment conditions. So that certainly also would contribute if it goes into this direction of rather maintaining or even increasing gender inequality at the workplace. We also see, as in the traditional economy, that there is an occupational segregation, also briefly mentioned as Jakob. Like, for example, there are areas where female workers are more dominant in platform work, but those are, as said, traditional female-dominated industries like cleaning, again, with lower job quality, with lower income, and also with lower prospects in the future. And in principle, that is a bit surprising because an online matching system, as the platform economy has as an underlying mechanism, should actually contribute to counterbalance these discrimination, these stereotypes that a human recruiter or client would have in deciding. But I think this very clearly shows that whether or not platform work can contribute to reduce gender inequalities at the workplace very much depends on the mechanism of the platform. And here we see a very wide variety. Jakob already mentioned anonymization versus non-anonymization, but it also within the anonymization depends very strongly on the quality of the algorithm. So in principle, you could assume that if it is a mechanical tool that decides who gets the job and who not, that more focuses on capabilities and availabilities rather than on issues like gender. But there, obviously, the algorithms are not yet of a quality that they really can make up for that. And we also have at least anecdotal evidence that there are discrimination either intentionally or non-intentionally built in these algorithms.
So, Irene, thank you very much indeed, expressing that concern that high quality platform work is not always accessible to women, and indeed about algorithm and algorithm management. Let me bring in Uma Rani into the discussion. We've heard the concerns from a European perspective. What about internationally? Where are the concerns there? And are they similar to the concerns that we've just heard from Irene, Jill, and Jakob?
Thanks, Carol, for this question and also for having me here. I sort of agree with what Jakob has presented, because he basically presented our earlier report of 2018. And I also, to an extent, agree with what the points that Irene has been making and what Jill has made. But where I sort of disagree is that this is not really predominantly a young person actually doing a job. Now, we have been, as part of the new report that's going to be released next year, doing surveys across the globe, and we have been covering about 12,000 workers, about roughly 5,000 in the online web-based work, and about roughly 7,000 in delivery workers and taxi driving sector. In the location-based platforms like delivery and taxi, you very clearly see it's a very male-dominated sector. But again, it's not a young male-dominated sector. It's across the whole range group that goes from 18 years to almost 65, 70 years. So you really see people participating in many of these activities across a range group. What is more worrying there is that you have a lot of highly educated workers actually participating in these activities. So that's, for me, a major concern, because often this is equated to the earlier arguments we used to have, like non-standard work is a stepping stone. So taxi and delivery work is like a stepping stone. Whereas what we see in the online web-based platforms, to an extent, is quite similar. It's across a full range group of, again, 18 to 65, 70 years. But what is worrying there is, well, the proportion of women participating in it, and that's very much like what you see in the traditional labor market. But when you look at very country-specific surveys that we have been doing, you see clearly that in some countries, like in Ukraine, you have about 60% of the women participating, compared to others, like the global picture, which is about 30%. And the other point that I would like to bring in here is that what's very interesting is, very clearly you have occupational segregation. And this occupational segregation is much more there in freelance platforms compared to other platforms. Like in software programming, you very clearly see that 1 in 100 is a woman. So very clearly, IT-related tasks are dominated by men, and this you see at the country level, like in Ukraine, China, or at the global level. But when it comes to freelance platforms, it's quite interesting to see that you have the distribution is not as skewed as you see elsewhere. And part of the reason why you have this is because of the platform design, which actually does not allow many of the women to take up certain kinds of tasks. So I think I'll stop here and come in later.
Thank you very much, Uma. And indeed, I'm sure we could spend many hours, in fact, expressing concerns about platform work based on your research. Let me, however, go to the second part, which is, if well regulated, according to Jakob's presentation, it could have potential benefits. It could advance gender equality. And let me bring in Carola Bouton from the European Commission here, because I know the European Commission has just announced some work that it's doing on this. If you could very briefly, Carola, take us through that.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you to the organizers for having us. Indeed, last week, the Commission, in presenting its work program for 2021, included a legislative proposal on platform work, with a byline that it should be on improving the working conditions of people involved on platform work and the securing of social protection for these people. Now, whatever I'm going to say now is very preliminary, because the initiative that we are to deliver is scheduled for the fourth quarter of 2021. But we have been doing some fact-finding, and what I would want to give here is the basically 6 domains where we have identified challenges. They correspond a bit with what the first presenter has said, but of course, we are coming to it from another angle. The first challenge is in platform work is the employment status. And this is a big challenge. Why? Because the employment status is the right it's the gateway to rights and protections. Now, it is not a problem that most people active on platforms are self-employed, or it's not a problem that very few are employee. The problem comes with the blurred distinction between the two. Because if the labor status, if the employment status is blurred, then it follows that your rights, employment rights and your social rights are blurred. And that's a big thing to tackle. It's a big thing to tackle at the national level. It's also a big thing to tackle at the European level. I'll leave it there, going to the second challenge, and that's the working conditions proper, under which we understand the transparency and predictability of the working conditions, the health and safety requirements, the working time, the earnings, the access to training, the transferability of rights, the whole lot. When we look at that, there are severe challenges in that a lot of the working conditions are, especially in some platform work, really precarious. We see in member states which have decent social protection, decent wages, we see platform workers frequently underpaid. But that I mean paid below the minimum wage in the country. Right? Now, the challenge here for the European level in all these working conditions is that the key challenge also depends very much on the business model of the platform. There's a bigger issue with working time or with pay, depending on whether your platform pays by the hour or by the task, and whether the working time can be tracked or is tracked, say, like in online work. Now, the third challenge that we have come across when we are to address platform work is, of course, access to social protection. It is linked to the employment status, of course. But there's an additional issue there that if some self-employed don't have some self-employed, a number of self-employed are not covered by some branches of the social security, it's also to be realized that because of the very fractured nature of the work, it is on-demand work, the eligibility rules of for a lot of the people who would be working as an employee may also make that they cannot have full rights that you have in other on-demand work as well, but it's predominant in platform work. The fourth problem that we have come across that we would need to address, or at least find solutions to, is the cross-border issue. It has to do with the jurisdiction that applies in platform work. It has, of course, to do also with social security coordination, and it is for both the worker, or at least the self-employed in most cases, like where is he going to pay contributions and under which system, which labor rights does he have, and where does he go to court. This is by all means something that could be or should be looked at the European level, but it doesn't stop there. Because if there is an issue of jurisdictions within the European Union, of course, there's also an issue beyond the European Union. Because a lot of platforms, of course, operate from outside the European Union. Then the fifth issue we are looking at, or challenge that we are looking at, is, of course, the algorithmic management of platform work. And especially, the bias or potential bias, the potential discrimination has been raised, but which of course is absolutely pure and proper, and we should take away. But the overall issue there is the lack of transparency, because even if a algorithmic management tool would be totally gender bias free, I would not know it. I could not know it, and I could not, demonstrate it. So that's an issue with the algorithmic management. And then the sixth one is not about individual rights, but collective rights. If a lot of people who work on platforms are self-employed, there's also an issue with their representation and their access to collective bargaining. There is an issue with representation because of course, also the fragmented nature of the platform work. It's very difficult to organize. It's very difficult to talk either in person or online to discuss representation and social dialogue. There's an additional difficulty with regard to collective bargaining. That is that it may, at least where genuine self-employed are concerned, it may fall to competition law. That's to say, just imagine that you have translators who agree that they shall not work under a certain price. It may, under certain rules which operate presently, be conceived as a cartel, which is the last thing you want, but it's still the case now, right?
So, Carola,
I leave it at that.
If I could just, yes, because I would just like to know, you've outlined those 6 challenges. How long is this public consultation going to take? When will we have the results of that?
Well, we are to do to give a detail on the process. It has been proposed under Article 153, and for the lawyers amongst you, you know that for us this means that we have a 2-stage social partner consultation. If we have to deliver this proposal in the 4th quarter of next year, basically the first phase of the social partners consultation has to happen at the beginning of next year. There's also going to be a public consultation. We are obliged to have this, and there will also be an impact assessment. So if I were to say first stage social partner consultation beginning of the year, second one, before the summer still, and then in between the public consultation, and then towards the 4th quarter, in between then let's say for the 3rd quarter, the impact assessment of the proposal, and then, which will not be a easy thing in the current conditions, and then for the 4th quarter, we would have the proposal from the Commission.
Understood. Thank you for outlining that time frame. Let me go back to our researchers. Irene, in your first answer, you were talking about algorithms. This is one of the areas that the Commission is going to look at. Do you see a particular solution in managing algorithms and perhaps their inherent bias?
Well, as also Carola flagged, I think the algorithm among these 6 domains that Carola mentioned is one which is really specific to platform work. Most of the other areas, they are also big issues in platform work, but they also occur in the traditional economy. So there may be a solution which is wider spanning than just finding a tailor-made one for the platform economy might be suitable. But as said, the algorithmic management, certainly that's a key feature of the platform work, and finding a solution there might be then really targeting a specific problem arising. And I think the 2 points mentioned, ensuring transparency, how is the algorithm working, what is the mechanism behind, not only for information for the worker, but also that they can align to it. We heard before there are, for example, different pricing strategies if you go for different type of tasks, but the worker might not know, which means they might not be able to access specific types of tasks which are better paid or have better conditions if you just don't know. And similar then also for the rating process. How is your performance assessed? What are the criteria behind, so that again you can influence how good your performance will be perceived, which then also very much influences whether you have access to better or worse jobs or tasks in the follow-up. And the second point, as I already mentioned before, certainly is still the quality of the algorithms per se. They seem to be working in a real automated way for some type of platform works, which are low-skilled, small-scale tasks like online macro tasks or taxi rides or similar. But for more sophisticated tasks, notably, for example, related to design services or so, we learn from the platforms that they themselves state that the algorithm is not yet there, and there is a lot of manual manipulation then as a follow-up there. So as I said, those would be the 2 strands where I would see that interventions would be possible and would help to improve also as regards to the gender issue.
Thank you, Irene. Jill, where do you see in the Commission's proposal some areas that you think that there is potential for platform work to advance gender equality? What would you like to see happen?
Is that to me? Sorry, I didn't. Yeah. Yes. Well, I think actually we've learned a lot from the experience of COVID that, in fact, it's not so difficult to extend rights to the self-employed. In European Union countries, we're actually quite quick to provide income support to the self-employed or relax eligibility rules. And I think now is an opportune time to say that everybody should have access to certain basic rights, such as sick pay and maternity leave pay, and also probably to some kind of basic pension. So I think we've got as Irene has said, these are bigger issues. They're not solely to do with platform work. We've got an opportunity to actually build on that innovation, even if it was probably very short-lived, and say it is possible to do things and to do things quickly. And we do need to have a more universal and comprehensive system of support, even if not necessarily going down a sort of basic income route, but to support people who aren't able to work at times of sickness and maternity, and to ensure that people don't lose out on pension support. I think I'd like to make a slight comment back to Uma about my focus on women in midlife. I think this is because it's been the major problem that even in periods of high employment in developed countries, that it's women who found themselves trapped and not able to re-access the labour market. That doesn't mean I don't think there's going to be a huge problem, particularly post-COVID, of high unemployment for men as well, and so that these are issues for men as well as for women. I just wanted to raise one issue that didn't get mentioned by the Commissioner, and that is whether there's any sort of support for, if you like, providing alternatives to these monopolies, which are the source of the power difference within platform work, whether there's going to be any support for local cooperatives owned by the workers who are providing the services. Now, I'm not suggesting this is going to be a full answer, but I think at least we should be allowing as many flowers to bloom as possible, and that offer better terms and conditions, and not allow the monopolies to drive these out. And that may mean some kind of intervention to support these forms of platforms.
Thank you, Jill. Let me just ask Carola, I know it's very early stages there. Jill has brought up this point about support for local cooperatives. Is this something which is in your proposal, Carola?
Well, we don't have the proposal yet, but we have talked to the cooperatives. We have talked to self-organization by platform workers, and actually their model is something that we are looking at, but whether this will come up in the proposal, I don't know. The other question is also a pertinent question about monopolies, which are basically about market share and then driving the ones paying decent or better conditions out of this market. The Commission is looking at platform work from different angles, and the monopoly angle is not the one we are looking at. We are coming from employment and social, but our colleagues from competition are looking at what you were raising there. So it's bigger, and especially for the big platforms who can set, really market conditions, and then that's basically it. So it is being looked at, and on cooperatives we are finding that, for example, but we'll come back to COVID. In very difficult times, they actually managed to remain profitable, which is not the case for many of these big venture capital supported platforms.
Thank you very much, Carola, for that. Let me bring in Uma then. We've been talking about the EU and the work that the Commission has just started in this consultation process. What do you think at international level needs to be done for platform work to actually advance gender equality?
Thanks for your comment, and picking on what Corona said and also picking on what both Jill and Irene said, I feel that there are three major issues that very clearly need to be looked at. And I also want to bring out the perspective that is there globally compared to what is being seen at the EU. The first is with regard to the whole employee-employer self-employed status. Now, while the debate in the EU has been around this, what other countries across the globe have actually tried to do is not go down the route of whether the platform worker is an employee or not, but try to actually provide a number of benefits to the workers. So whether it be social security benefits or occupational safety and health or work injury, so they have gone down around that route to ensure that workers are protected. This is a very clear piecemeal approach that is being followed, but this is in light of trying to see how can you then universalize many of these benefits for all workers. So that's been one interesting attempt. And here Latin America has been quite interesting in the sense that they've used innovative technologies to actually reach out to all the platform workers towards it in many of these countries. The second thing is the algorithm, very clearly. It's something that is very unique to the platform, which Irene very clearly mentioned. And I think there we need to look at two things. One is the source code of the algorithm is actually part of the trades treaties. It is part of as a result, it is part of the World Trade Organization. So I think this has a huge impact on the workers and the way the entire management of work, whether it's the evaluation, allocation, reward of the task is taking place. I think at the multilateral level, you need to have a clear discussion now among the different multilateral organizations about how to move towards a regulation of algorithm. One step that has been taken till now has been in Argentina, where it's much more a discussion that is going on in the parliament about a bill to see how the implementation and operation of the algorithm can be made more transparent and more accountable. So according to me, this is one good step ahead, but a lot more needs to be done at the multilateral level. The third and the most important one is the cross-border regulation. And here is where the whole conflict of law issue comes in, because today, because the entire platform is intangible, you have software and computers through which this entire operation takes place. You have platforms in one country, clients in another set of countries, and workers across the globe. So how do you actually regulate it? And here, the Future of Work Commission of the ILO in last year came out very clearly and said that we clearly need an international regulation, cross-border regulation, which could be very similar to the Maritime Labour Convention. And I think that would be one step forward for us to see how at international level with multilateral agencies, we can go about regulating this particular sector.
Thank you very, very much, Uma, for giving us some suggestions there on what can be done at an international level. Now, Carola and Jill were both mentioning COVID, and of course, one of the reasons that we are here virtually is because of COVID, and I can see that some of the audience questions are on COVID. So let's address the impact of COVID in a moment with the audience questions. Before we do that, I would like to take some interventions from the floor. And first of all, ask Martin Lauerberg, Senior Advisor at the Confederation of Danish Employers. Martin, thank you for joining us. And if you could give some quick responses to what you've been hearing.
I can, although I had connection problems, so some of what has been said I have not heard, but fortunately I managed to connect, so I've heard most of what you have said. First of all, I'd have to say that I agree with a lot of what has been said. I think the whole advance of platform economy is something that should be taken very seriously. And if we see that these forms of employment are disruptive somehow and they change the labor markets, I think that should definitely be monitored. According to the latest numbers I've seen, we have perhaps not experienced a surge in the rate of platform work. Some years back, that's what we expected to happen, but it hasn't really happened. So I'm not very worried, although I share the concerns of the other speakers. In terms of gender equality, I'd say that for me, the discussion is maybe a little bit strange because platform work is mostly a male thing, at least in the numbers that we have access to. It's mostly a male thing. And I think the reason for that is that it was very predominant in the taxi services, So Uber was very predominant some years back. So maybe it has changed now, but I think it's probably still a male thing predominantly. So, but I agree that if it turns out to reinforce gender inequality, that should certainly be taken seriously. There's one thing that I had to say, and I think this is also something that Business Europe has been saying a lot, and it is, for me, the discussion of platform economy is maybe not so different from the general discussion of atypical work. So for me, the fact that there's a platform connecting workers and clients, this doesn't really change a whole lot. I mean, I think the whole discussion is really about atypical work and insecurity. And so I think that it would be better to just take a general discussion instead of focusing very much on platform work. So yeah.
Thank you, Martin. But if it does exacerbate gender inequalities, which is what our researchers are concerned about, particularly that there is high quality platform work, but women often don't have access to that. What do you think can be done to make sure that platform work at least doesn't hinder gender equality, but let's hope that it can advance it?
I think the regulation should certainly be adequate. So, for example, there's been this whole debate about whether or not you're employed versus self-employed. And I think this distinction should be dealt with certainly. So, I mean, firms shouldn't be able to somehow exploit putting people in a different category as self-employed. So that's one thing. I'm not sure if that's really that big an issue, so, excuse me.
I can see that you're somebody's just come into, and in fact, if I can just bring in then, we've heard from Martin from the Employers Organization. Let's now bring in Anja Lahama, who's a representative of a Finnish trade union, STTK, which is a member of the European Trade Union Confederation. Anja is also a member of the IGA Experts Forum. So, Anja, what's your response to what you've heard on platform work? Does it hamper or can it actually be used to advance gender equality? Please give us your views.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that the situation created by this COVID has accelerated the digitalization and platformization of the economy. And this is stressing very much the need to put work and gender equality at the center. Many circumstances represent a serious concern for the achievement of gender equality. For example, pay gap between women and men is totally unfair. And the most important key to deal with this problem would be pay transparency. So I do very much hope that the European Union will be strict enough to give the pay transparency directive. We really need binding rules. And we also need to increase binding regulatory frameworks that safeguard women's position in the labor market, in the society, and the digitalization of the world of work. It is more important than ever to address the consequences for workers that work on digital platforms. They might be denied to access health and safety and social protection rights and refused their right to collective bargaining. And also, it is crucial that these issues are addressed and considered in a gender perspective, because inequalities in the labor market are not gender neutral, and the risk is that digitalization magnifies these inequalities. It is also very much crucial that the regulatory framework on digitalization and employment is accompanied by other measures that protect and promote women's rights. It must be ensured that artificial intelligence applied to platform work is done in a trustworthy, ethically and socially responsible way, respecting European values, equality and labor rights. It must be guaranteed that artificial intelligence doesn't imply direct or indirect discrimination of women. And we must carefully implement fully the Work-Life Balance Directive in a way that it covers fair, respectful and balanced rules for digitalized work. And European Union should also introduce binding rules for women's quota in company bodies and take part in the decision making. It is also important to invest in the fight against domestic violence that dramatically has increased. And to conclude, it's all the most important to recognize the role of social partners in managing such a challenging environment in a fair and sustainable way, and thus to give proper relevance to their voices and respect this. On this regard, the social partners have concluded an autonomous agreement on digitalization that includes recognition of the need to ensure that the digital transition is fair and has equal outcomes for men and women at work.
Thank you very much, Anja. And now I would like to take some of our audience questions. Indeed, our speakers have mentioned COVID. COVID is top of mind. And one of the questions here is, are there any insights about the impact of COVID-19 on gender equality in platform work? Irene, can I ask you for your response, and then Jill and Uma to that?
Yeah. Well, we from our side, we don't have very strong data on that, just some indications. And I think that is, again, a topic where we see quite the heterogeneity within platform work. So if you just take the on-location services, which means where the services are provided in a kind of a face-to-face situation, there the crisis brought about immediately differences like delivery riders. They experience literally all through Europe a high demand because of the lockdown situation, where people were not able to go to restaurants and didn't want to go to supermarkets. So some of their business models then from the platforms also were expanded from, for example, food delivery to also deliver groceries or medicine. And that then turned out to be positive for the riders in terms of that they had more demand, more income. But I think also this needs to be taken with caution, because first of all, it was a rather temporary phenomenon. And then having a wider look at what it means for the working conditions in terms of work intensity, long working hours, again, it might not be so positive. And these are certainly tasks which are more dominated by male, while other tasks, which, as you said in the beginning, are more dominated like female, like cleaning services or other household services, quite naturally, notably in the lockdown period, they broke down completely. And I think an important point there is to also consider a point that was mentioned before, because of the fragmentation of the job and the employment status. If that income went completely or at least dropped to a large extent, platform workers were then confronted also with a lack of social protection, like, for example, they didn't have much access to unemployment or social benefits. And Jill mentioned that one good outcome of the crisis was that some of the support instruments were expanded, notably for self-employed. And we as Eurofound, we have established a huge database on support instruments during the crisis, where we can also identify those that explicitly target self-employed, but literally none of them just slightly exaggerated, explicitly also include platform workers in their target group. And even if they implicitly would allow for self-employed platform workers to be accessible, the eligibility criteria make it questionable whether that really provides some support for them.
Thank you. Jill, your insights on the impact of COVID.
Yeah, I'll take up something slightly different, and that is the impact of working from home. To some extent, that has been, again, a major experiment and can be seen as positive because it's proved to employers that they've been over-resistant to more flexible working. However, there are major dangers involved in that, and that is that we may see a reinforcement of gender segregation, with women being confined to working from home while men return to the office. And I think it's if this becomes a new norm that we could see a major increase in women being dependent upon platform work, because if everything's being done from home, it may be that employers will over time reduce their reliance on directly employed workers and go more to platform work. I'm concerned because, first of all, women may face higher unemployment than men due to the particular form of COVID and its impact on areas such as hospitality and arts and entertainment, etc., where women tend to take a high share of employment. But also, I think that certainly in the UK and maybe elsewhere, women are increasingly seen as unreliable workers because they're having to look after children as schools close, either completely, but more recently on an intermittent basis as COVID cases emerge. And it's mainly women who are doing the childcare. So I am worried about women's access to employment outside of platform work, and that therefore can have major negative long-term impacts on women's equality.
Thank you, Jill. Uma, what about from the international perspective? What has been, from your research, I'm sure that it's just starting, about the impact of COVID?
I'd just like to take the point that Jill has made and take it forward. I think the real concern is that of what is happening outside the platform work very clearly. Now, what we are seeing is that we've been tracking some of the online web-based platforms, 5 major ones, along with Oxford Internet Institute. And there very clearly you see that since the COVID pandemic happened, there's been a very huge increase in the supply of workers. Now, it's very difficult to disaggregate as to, what proportion of it is men or women, but keeping that 1/3 of these workers are women, you find a huge increase in workers that, within the platforms. Now, this has huge implications. Now, there are 2 reasons why this is happening. One is that there's huge layouts that are happening because of businesses not being able to thrive or survive during the crisis. And this could be across the globe and in certain regions that you see. The second thing that you see happening is exactly what Jill mentioned. Because of the whole household and care responsibilities that are increasing on women, women are tending to shift towards this kind of a platform work. But then there is a larger question there with regard to whether there is a demand for work actually catching up with the supply, because there's a huge excess supply that is happening there. And because of competition, you find that it further leads to low pay and has huge implications on the earnings of the workers while they are spending a lot of time on these platforms. So I think the story is not very, it's quite gloomy, and it is not as positive as one would like to think.
Yes, absolutely. There's a comment here, Jill, on your point on cooperatives. Says, excellent point on cooperatives and self-organized groups. Could local authorities be empowered to help parents, for example, develop platforms for work-life balance? Jill, if you'd like to give us your thoughts on that.
I certainly think this is an area where there could be grants and support to innovative ideas to take back control, if you like, of these platforms. We talked a lot about wages, but there's also, of course, a lot of the profits for the client, in the sense that they're not paying for the social protection, they're paying much lower wages. And then the potential profits from the actual intermediary, the platform. And maybe we need to rebalance opportunities to participate in all these sources of income, particularly, given the impact of COVID, we need to find new ways of actually improving the wage share and the support for people in work.
There's a question here which says currently platform work only concerns 10% of the adult population in the EU. What is the expected increase in the near and distant future? Irene, I don't know whether you can put your crystal ball in front of you or whether that you were looking at future scenarios of platform work. If anybody else would like to contribute to that question, please just raise your hand. But as I know that Irene has done some future planning, I'll throw that question to you first.
Okay, I'll try to answer that. I don't have my crystal ball, just a little bit of fairy dust as we're placed here in Dublin in Ireland. So we certainly do not have any numbers in terms of being able to forecast. But what we see from the past and also from the current situation, that platform work tends to be more prevalent in countries where the economic situation is not as good, meaning that, as was also mentioned by some of the other speakers, it is seen as an alternative on the labor market when no proper job, if you want to call it like this, is available. And that makes us assume that as we are facing now an economic and labor market downturn as an outcome of the COVID crisis, it can be assumed that at least some types of platform work will increase in the future. And that raises then also challenges regarding the longer term perspective of what these workers will do in the future. So whether platform work will turn out to be a stepping stone into work or jobs with better working conditions if they wished so, or whether it's a kind of a dead end job.
Thank you. Carola, let me just ask you the next question. You've outlined the public consultation and the 6 areas that you're going to look on platform work, but there's a question here of whether is the EU planning to regulate platform work by taking into account the gender perspective, Carola? Is that a future project or will that be done during this consultation?
No, this will definitely be done in this consultation. On these 6 domains that we are looking at, some are more gender sensitive, let's put it like this, than others. But definitely it would not be something apart. We would look at whatever we are analyzing and putting forward in our initiative, whether this, by the way, we are obliged to do this, but we would in any case look at how this impacts on gender. And it's quite clear already that the on-location work is something totally different to online work as far as gender is concerned. But I would want to come back very quickly on something that I didn't say, because we've pointed out the obstacles and the dangers for gender equality or dangers to gender equality. I must say that on collective rights, which has been mentioned by one of the speakers, not just on platform work, because indeed it can be broader, this on-demand work. We have found that where there is collective representation and where wages are collectively agreed, the gender pay gap is actually less than where it is not collectively agreed. And where there is collective representation, we see that there is lower, how shall I say, verbal abuse, less bullying, less harassment. So on that already, these are issues which we will take with us when we look at the platform work. That's clear. There will not be a separate initiative on gender issues. It will be taken into this one.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Another question, and perhaps this is for you, Irene, too. What is the coverage of the most recent studies on gender equality and platform work? Is data available for all member states? Irene.
the simple answer to that is no. There is no European-wide study which really covers all countries. There are the biggest study that covers 16 member states of the European Union that was done by the Joint Research Centre of the European Union. Last year, actually, in the second wave, that's also the data that Jakub referred to in the beginning of his presentation, and that also gives some indication about the gender distribution. But as said, that would be the most comprehensive at European level, covering the number of countries available.
Jakub, you said, of course, that we need to do more research, and it is an area which needs more research if legislation or regulations are to be gender sensitive. At the end of your presentation, Jakub, you mentioned that IGA was going to do more research. Can you elaborate on that in any way for us?
Yes, I was going to react on this because indeed there are some surveys now on platform workers, but they don't typically have so much of a gender focus. So what we can usually see is certain type of distribution of women and men across different type of services, and then kind of overall prevalence rates based on these studies. And given that the evidence is so far very limited, we have decided at AGA to carry out a study that is specifically focusing on platform work from a gender equality perspective, and which will actually involve a fairly large-scale survey of platform workers in a number of countries, and we will especially look at certain angles relevant from gender equality perspectives, such as work-life balance. And based on this study, then we will be hoping to get a bit of better understanding on what's actually happening from a gender perspective in platform work, because so far, from what people have been saying around, the evidence is fairly limited and often relies on certain type of qualitative studies or logical assessments and so on.
Well, thank you very, very much for that. Thank you for our speakers, and thank you for the audience also for asking such informed questions on the issue of whether platform work hinders or helps gender equality. I would now like to ask everybody to return to the main plenary session, where there will be some closing remarks by the director of IGA, Carleen Sheila, and also from Mariana Vieira da Silva, Minister of State for the Presidency of Portugal. That's all from us. Thank you very, very much for joining us today.